In the last two lectures, we learned what are pure and impure pipes in Angular and why should we not use pipes for filtering or sorting data. Now the question is, if we should not use pipes for filtering or sorting data, then how should we implement filtering or sorting in Angular? The answer is we can write filtering or sorting logic in the component class itself. We don't need a pipe for that. Let's understand this by implementing a data filtering logic in our Angular component. Let's go to VS Code, and currently we are using this filter student pipe for filtering this students array. Now from here I am going to remove this pipe because as we learned we should not use pipes for filtering data. So this is the first change. Then let's go to app component class, and here I am going to create a new property, and let's call this property filtered students, and this is going to be of type student array. So we are going to use this property to store filtered students. That's because we do not want to lose the original student list, and we do not have to make a round trip to the web server on every new search. Okay. And we are also going to loop over this filtered students array in the view. So instead of using this students property, we are going to use this filtered students property. All right, let's go back to our app component class. Now let me rename this filter text property to underscore filter text property. So we have learned that this filter text property is going to store the filter text which the user will enter in the filter text box. That means whatever value the user will enter inside this text box, we want to store that value inside this filter text property, this underscore filter text property. Now for this filter text property, I am going to create a getter and setter. So to create a getter, we use this get keyword and then we specify a name for the getter. Let's call it filter text. And from within this method, we are simply going to return the value stored in this underscore filter text property. Okay, so we are binding this property in our view. So you can see that on this input element, we are binding this filter text property. Okay, so this getter will be called when the binding needs to read the value. In the same way, let's also specify a setter. And again, let's call it filter text. Now, this setter will be called every time the value in the filter text box will change. And this setter will also receive that value. Okay, so let's specify its type. It will be string because whatever value we will enter in this text box, that is going to be a string. So that value will be assigned to this value parameter here. And inside this setter, let's set this dot filter text equals value. All right, now we want to create a method which will have the logic for filtering the students. So here, let's go ahead. Let me move this in the same line because here inside this method we don't have any logic. And let's create a method and let's call it filter student by gender. Okay, and this method is going to receive an argument. Let's call that maybe filter term. Okay, and it is going to be of type string. So to this filter term, we want to assign the value which the user has entered in the filter text box. And inside this, let's write the logic for filtering the data. So we already have that logic here inside this transform method. So I'm going to copy this logic and let's specify it here. Or let me actually copy this complete logic where we are also using this if statement. And let's go ahead and let's paste it inside this method. Okay, now here we need to use this keyword. So here we have this students array. We want to access that students array. So for that we can use this dot students dot length. And here also let's use this dot filter text. So when the length of this students array is equal to 0, or when the filter text property is equal to empty string, then we want to return the students array. Okay. Otherwise, we want to filter the students array. So here we have the filtering logic. And again, this should be this dot filter text. In fact, this should not be this dot filter text. Instead, it should be this filter term. Okay. And finally, let's also call this method from within this setter which we have just created. Okay, and to this method, let's pass this value. So this value is storing the value which the user will enter in the filter text box, right? So that value we want to assign to this filter term. And based on that, this method will filter the students table. All right. Now, whatever this method will return, we want to assign it to this filter students array. So let's say this dot filter students equals whatever value this method is going to return. And here also we need to use this keyword. All right. And finally, initially when the page loads, we want to set this filtered students to this students array. So initially we want to display all the students, right? So for that, again inside this ng-onInit method, let's say this dot filtered students equals this dot students. With this, let's save the changes. Let's go to the web page. So initially it is displaying all the students. Now let's type male here. So now it is displaying only the male students. Let's type female here. So it is displaying only the female students. Now when I click on this add student button, a new student with gender female will be added. So that should also be displayed in this table. Let's see if that's the case. If I click on this add student button, you won't see that newly added student in this filtered table. But if I remove this text from here, you will notice that that student has been added whose gender is female. So when the table is filtered and then when we add a new student, in that case, it is not displaying the student in the filtered table. That's because we also need to change the logic inside this method as well. So after we have added a new student to the students array, we again want to call this filter student by gender method. So let's say this dot filter student by gender, and to this let's pass this dot filter text, and then whatever this method will return, we want to assign this to filter students array. So let's say this dot filter students equals whatever this method will return. With this, let's save the changes. Let's go to the web page. Let's filter this students table by gender female. So two students are being displayed. Now when I click on this add student, a third student has been added whose gender is female, and now that student is also being displayed in this filtered table. In the same way, we also have to implement the functionality for this change gender. So if I click on this change gender, it will change the gender of first student to female. So that should also be displayed in this filtered table. But currently, if I click on this button, it will not happen. So if I remove this text, you will see that the gender of the first student has changed to female, but it was not displayed in the filtered table. That's because here also we need to change the logic. So once the gender is changed, we again want to call this filter student by gender method, and whatever it will return, we want to assign it to this filtered students array. So let's copy this line and let's paste it here. With this, let's save the changes. Let's go to the web page. Let's filter by female. So two female students are being displayed. Let's click on this change gender. It will change the gender of first student to female, and now that student is also being displayed in this filtered table. And if I click on this add student button, it will add a new dummy student with the gender female, and that student is also being displayed in this filtered table. So in this way, you can implement the filtering logic in the component class itself. You don't need a pipe for that. And this implementation is not going to cost any performance issues. Okay? This is all from this lecture. If you have any questions, then feel free to ask it. Thank you for listening and have a great day.